Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel where we are doing direct comparison of these two eyeshadow palettes. This is Undergrowth from Cosmic Brushes or Cosmic Beauty. This is Stone and Rock from Udenzai. For quite a while, this has been like one of my favorite green heavy eyeshadow palettes. It's really, really beautiful. And it's actually the reason that I held off on getting another really, really beautiful eyeshadow palette, because it looks like this, and they're pretty similar. If I hold them up to you guys side by side, the Stone and Rock palette obviously has more variety. It has more blue tones, it has the matte white, but on the whole, the general feel of both palettes pretty close. And I thought that it would be useful for myself, if for no one else, but hopefully for you as well, that I do a side-by-side swatch comparison of these two palettes and see how close they really are. I'm pretty sure I'm going to be justified in keeping both of them because there definitely is something different about them, but I just want to see, particularly these more murky tones, how close they are between brands. So just for reference, I've swatched the Stone and Rock palette on my arm. I don't really have enough time to swatch both of them, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to go shade by shade. I mean, obviously there's no white in the Undergrowth, so I'm not going to bother trying to find a comparison for that. But I think about 2/3 of these colors from Stone and Rock can be found in... There's like literally sparkle flaking off of my arm from this shade right here. Anyway, I'm gonna swatch a Stone and Rock shade pointed out my arm or whatever, and then try to find something in Undergrowth that I think matches. The reason I've swatched Stone and Rock and not Undergrowth is because Stone and Rock has fewer shades, so I'm just gonna kind of go down the line and see what I can find matches for. Within the Undergrowth palette, the closest I would find to a white matte is this Roots shade here, and by the way, I used this palette for today's eyeshadow look, so if you want to see how I did this, I will link today's video in the description box. Anyway, Roots is the closest to the white matte, but obviously it's not a white matte, so I'm not going to waste my time. The next shade in the palette is called Frenzy, and I don't think it's close at all, but I'm just going to swatch because it's sort of close. This is Frenzy in Stone and Rock, and I'm going to compare it to Vegetation here in Undergrowth. Now, Vegetation is on my lid in like the inner area. That's obviously a more green silvery base, and Frenzy is quite a bit more blue heavy. So no, they're not close at all. Here's where we get into some comps, I think. The shade Madness within Stone and Rock, and I think I'm gonna compare that to, what's the best way to do this? It can be so awkward. Madness is kind of a cross between these two, I think. But not really either one. It's got more green in it. Like, this is a true swampy green. This is more mustard yellow, and this is a bit more of a sunshine yellow. But there's no really swampy green in here. So I'll take Madness, and then I'll compare it to those two in Undergrowth. The Madness shade is very, very smooth. It feels extremely buttery. It reminds me of Blend Bunny. No, it reminds me of Ensley Rain mattes, actually. Here we have Marsh, also very creamy. And Lichen is a tiny bit more grainy, I think. Lichen is the more pastel shade. So Marsh and Lichen. I'll swatch Lichen again. Also, I did just wipe my hands, so maybe it's not so good, but you can see exactly as I described. The first shade is more of a swamp green, you know, really murky and sewage sort of green. It really is. I love it. Okay, so this is that murky baby poop sewage green. And then we have the other two. One of them is more mustard and one of them is a little more sunshiny. If you use the one from Stone and Rock, it's going to just lean a bit more green, so it's going to contrast less with green mattes. Next, I've got the shade Passion, which I think is probably closest to this one, the Undergrowth shade, actually. Passion is sort of a green with a little bit of a silver and a little bit of a goldy sort of base, and Undergrowth looks to be the multi-chrome in the palette. I could also perhaps compare it to Fireflies, so let's do that. Stone and Rock, this is Undergrowth, and this is Fireflies. Okay, so the Stone and Rock color has a lot more brown in it, but I think that depending on the angle, like right here at my angle, what I can see, I hope I'm not leaving frame, they look almost the same, but this one is a smidge more brown and warm toned. But then when I turn my hand, then they shift, especially the Undergrowth shade, which looks a little bit more multichromatic. It looks different. So now I see a lot more brown here, and here I see more like a green blue. And then this feels kind of like lime green mixed with gold. So it's, again, they're pretty close, but they're not really the same, or maybe it's the same in one angle, but then the rest of the angles are not there. Onto the shade Cheer. I'm not going to bother comparing that. You can see on my arm, it is the, where are we? This one right here. So it's quite a blue, like super deep teal matte, and there's nothing like that in Undergrowth. I'm not going to bother. So now we have Cheerfulness, which is pretty close to Vegetation. So let's try those. Cheerfulness and Vegetation. Yeah, again, depending on the angle, I think they look the same, but then from a different angle, they're different. Cheerfulness has more of a, almost like a sky blue-ish reflect, and Vegetation, you know, the more I look at them, I feel like they have the same reflect, but at different angles. So when I'm looking at them this way, I see the one has the sky blue and one has green, but then I shift my hand and the other one has sky blue and the first one has green. I do think that boy, that is hard to tell. I'm sorry. Do you guys see what I'm talking about at all? Where it looks like they're different, but then when the hand turns and the light catches from a different angle, then they look different in the exact opposite direction, if that makes any sense. For undertones, I was gonna say that I think one of them is warmer, but then when I turn my hand, I just get that same warmth in the other one. So would I say that they're the same? My baby's waking up. Hang on a second. Well guys, it didn't work out that I was able to film that entire video uninterrupted. What happened was, actually, I did film the second half, but I forgot to hit record, which was a very annoying thing to discover when I was finally done and all cleaned up. I'm like, because I turned my video off to take care of my baby and like settle her again. And then I came back and I was so like focused, dive right back in, finish the video, finish the swatching. I didn't hit record. So here I am on another day. If you're curious about today's eyeshadow look, it is filmed. It is using the Pat McGrath Sunlit Moonlit Seduction palette. The palette looks like this, and I did film this look. So I'm pretty sure this is probably going to go up on my channel before today's video, so if it does, I will link it in the description box, and if not, it is the only Pat McGrath palette I've ever tried, so you should be able to easily find it on my channel if you're curious. Anyway, I'm going to dive right back in, continuing the swatch comparisons between Stone and Rock and Undergrowth. So let me just get into that mindset. This is where I left off in the last video, and I kind of was interrupted by my baby needing me, but pretty much where I landed was this shade, Cheerfulness, is very, very similar to this shade Vegetation. The biggest difference I found in swatching them out was that they seem to have all the same flips, they're just in different directions. So looking at it from one direction, I'll see color A and then color B, and then when I turn my hand, the opposite colors will show in opposite swatches. So as far as I'm concerned, it's basically a dupe. You know, it's pretty much the same shade. When you use it on your lid, you're gonna get the same effect. That being said, let's move on to the next shade in the palette called Exuberance, and this is very much like this shade right here, Fern. I don't think there's anything, like these two are too brown. Now, remember, I already filmed all this, but it was a few days ago, so, you know, it's kind of newish for me, but kind of not. So, Exuberance, like these are really close. Exuberance has more brown in it, and Fern has more green in it. They're really, really close. They're basically the same depth. I think they're... I'm not going to say that they're the same shade, not really, because I do see a difference in undertones. So if you pair this with browns, or if you work to blend it away, like as the shade blends out, as you can see around the edges of my swatch, you'll get like a yellowy brown base. Whereas if you blend this one out, you're going to still get more of a green blue leading base. So they're close. Again, possibly the same kind of effect depending on what you pair them with. If you pair them both with true greens, you'll get a closer effect, but if you pair them with browns or yellows, it's going to move in different directions. Now we move on to the shade Gleefulness, which is such a lovely like peachy orangey champagne sort of shimmer. I don't know. And I was comparing that to which one? Wilderness. And also I'm going to compare it to this here, Fungi, but not going to use, what is that, Cordyceps. I'm not going to use Cordyceps because that one's too orange-brown leaning. Oh, the sun's coming out. My kiddo broke my ring light and I don't have a replacement for it, so I have just been using whatever light comes in the window, per usual, although usually it's that plus a ring light. Anyway, when I started filming today's tutorial, the lighting was a little darker and it was more overcast outside. Okay, so we have Stone and Rock, then we have the two shades from Undergrowth. And Stone and Rock is kind of like a moon gold sort of base. It doesn't look quite as peachy as I thought it did in the pan. It's a very cool toned base to this gold, but then the shift is a little more warm toned. This one in the middle is again gold with a bit of brown, but I think there's a flash of green in there. It's kind of hard for me to tell, but I think that there's some green in there. And then this one is more of like an orangey bronze kind of color. Really pretty, but definitely not the same. Okay, now we're moving on to another color that's pretty consistent, I think, between the two. This is the shade Jubilance. It's very smooth, very creamy and smooth. And I'm going to compare it to, it's kind of like a mix of these two. It's not as orange as this. In fact, I'm not even going to swatch. I think it's closest to Roots right here. And I'm not going to swatch Sludge either. This is called Sludge. I'm not going to swatch this one either because this one's too red. Like, we got like orangey and terracotta undertones with these. I think it's closest to Roots. So we've got Jubilance and Roots. Jubilance and Roots. Both kind of midtones. This is midtone leaning cool, and this is midtone leaning a little bit darker. In the first half of today's video, you saw I was wearing an Undergrowth look, and I used Roots in the outer corner to like start the eyeshadow look. So these are close if you look at them in the pan, but then when you use them on the skin, they're different. And also, you might be able to see on my finger, the way it's swatched out, that one of them it's just got these drag marks of sort of orangey warmth, and the other one does not. Okay, next we have the shade Lightheartedness, and I'm going to compare that directly to Swamp. So Lightheartedness, Swamp. I remember the final outcome of today's video because, again, I did it all already, as far as how many shades were basically the same, but I don't remember which ones they were, except for that first shade where I left off. So Lightheartedness and Swamp. Lightheartedness is a little bit... There's a difference in depth. Lightheartedness is a little bit lighter and Swamp is a little bit darker. I don't really see a ton of difference in color. There's something about it that I can't quite place. I think you're gonna get the same basic result here. You know, whatever you do with this shade, whether you lay it on the whole lid as a smoky eye, whether you lay it to help transition from a light shimmer into dark mattes or something, I think you're gonna get the same look. I think that Lightheartedness seems to have maybe a tiny hint of a different undertone, maybe a little bit more silvery-ish. My daughter thinks that this one is a little bit more black-based, and I would agree with her. It's subtle. Again, if you're using them on the lid, you're probably going to get more or less the same result. And I think that won't change too much based on what you pair it with. Now, if you were to pair Lightheartedness with a whole bunch of really, really light shades, then maybe you'd get a different result. But again, pretty close. Now we're on to the shade Dreamland, and there's not really anything in Undergrowth here that is like Dreamland. Dreamland is a mid-tone brown, but it's very, very cool. There's a gray base to this shade, and there's nothing in Undergrowth that even sort of resembles that. So I don't think I'm going to bother swatching. I feel like Dreamland might be a combination of this one and this one-ish, but not really. So I don't think that's worth swatching. And the same goes for High Spirits. There's nothing in Undergrowth that's even remotely blue. And High Spirits is a very blue-green, like mermaid tealy sort of color. So I won't bother swatching that either. You did see all of these colors swatched out on my arm in the first half of today's video. Now we have the shade Elevated. And Elevated, I will compare, even though I know it's not really close, I'm going to compare to Bark, which I'm not sure if it's a black or just a super dark green. That one's going to come up later over here. And the first time I went through this, I also compared Elevated to Nettle. But Nettle is way more green. But let's just do it for kicks. For science. Okay, Elevated is a warmer cocoa brown, like it really does look like baking cocoa. Bark is... I'm going to say it's basically a black, but I don't think it's pitch. I think it's got a little bit of green. And then Nettle is obviously a beautiful forest green, not at all like Elevated. Two more shades to go. This one is called Splendid, and it is a black with shimmer. It's got like silvery shimmers. I'm not going to swatch this one. Again, you saw the swatch in the beginning of the video, but this one is nothing like anything in the Undergrowth palette. And finally, we have the shade Passage, which I obviously could have left the other swatch on my arm. Passage feels a little bit dry. I'm going to swatch that again next to Bark. Passage, Bark. Passage is a beautiful jet black. Bark is not so deep. And again, I hope you can see on camera, I really do think that Bark has just a little flash of slight green, like a dark green, maybe not even the undertone, but some kind of a green presence, which makes perfect sense given that it's the Undergrowth palette, you know. But Passage is a deep black, and it's very nice. It's very pigmented. It is a little dry in the pan, as are a couple of the shades in my Udensai palettes. So there you have it, guys. That's my side-by-side swatch comparison of the Stone and Rock palette from Udensai and the Undergrowth palette from Cosmic Beauty. On the whole, they're definitely not the same. Looking at them, there are definitely a few shades that pop out as being pretty much the same, or at least the same vibe. But in swatching them between the first half and the second half of today's video, I really only found two that to me were basically, you know, the same effect. You're going to get the same look, all else being equal, you know, they're more or less the same shadow. Everything else, there are differences. There are differences in depth or in undertone or in finish. And I think that given how much I enjoy this palette and the fact that this one does give me more contrast with the white matte and the bluey and green and teal tones, and also a difference in finish, and on the whole I really enjoy my palettes from Udensai. But then this one just scratches an itch that I didn't know existed, and I love it. And I enjoy both of these very much. Now, I've only used this one once. The first half of today's video was where I was wearing this palette for the first time. Really, really lovely. I have a good time with both of these, so I don't think that this palette is a reason to get rid of this palette. I appreciate you being here. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Do let me know if you have either or both of these, if you love green eyeshadow, what your favorite green eyeshadow palettes are, and be sure to check out my description box because if today's tutorial is live, I will link it there. I also have an Udensai playlist, which I can put in the description box. I also have a Cosmic Beauty or Cosmic Brushes playlist, and I hope that you'll consider liking and subscribing before you go if you enjoyed today's video and you want to see more content like this. I'll chat with you guys next time. Bye.